Okay. Apologies, I'm a couple of minutes late. I struggled to contact Zoom. We usually use Teams. In the past, it was okay, but it wasn't today, of course. So apologies. Yeah, okay. Good afternoon, everyone. Very warm welcome to the Survey Futures Survey Practice workshop on recruitment methods for surveys without field interviews in the UK. I'm Olga Maslovskaya, and I'm a professor of survey methodology and social statistics at the University of Southampton. I'm also deputy director of Survey Futures, and I'll talk about Survey Futures program a little bit. Probably many of you are familiar with the Survey Futures program, but if not, just a couple of main points. Survey Futures is a multi-institutional research program, and our main overarching aim is to ensure that it will still remain possible in the United Kingdom to carry out high-quality social surveys. So Survey Futures is a collaboration between 9 universities and 3 survey agencies, NatSun, Ipsos, and Varian. And we're working in partnership with the Office for National Statistics and also with National Centre for Research Methods. So the program is a very large program. We have a very broad research program, and it includes over 50 researchers, I think over 60 researchers. Researchers are working across 9 different research strands and investigating the most significant topics of survey research. Our program is coming to an end very soon, so we're currently at a very exciting point of the program where there are many outputs are coming out. If you're interested in the outputs, in the publications, or to hear about what we're up to, you can visit our website, which is at the end of this slide, or you could join our mailing list if you haven't done it yet. And if you join our mailing list, you will receive all the notifications about all new outputs as soon as they become available on the website. So now a couple of words about our Research Strand 4. Thank you, Christian. Research Strand 4 is the title of the Research Strand is Methods for Surveys Without Field Interviewers. We have 5 different sub-projects. The first one is on recruitment, and this workshop will present the work which has been done within this specific sub-project. We also do work on accessibility and inclusivity for population subgroups. Maybe some of you will be joining the webinar a bit later today. Now, can you please go back to that slide? Thank you. Also, another sub-project is on targeted procedures. Another one is knock to nudge, and the 5th one is on within household selection of individuals. Within this research strand, this is a true collaboration between 3 institutions: University of Essex, University of Southampton, and City St. George's, University of London. So you can see our team membership on this slide. Next slide, please. So we have already published the evidence review, so you can find on our Survey Futures website, and the link is there. And currently we're working on the Survey Practice Guide. It's a work in progress. But without further ado, I would like to hand over to, I think Enthantha will be presenting first. Today we'll have 2 excellent presentations. First, Enthantha will be talking about the literature review, which is associated with the evidence review, which has been recently published on the website. And then we will have a couple of minutes for clarification questions. Then Christian will talk about survey practice review. Again, we'll have a couple of minutes for clarification questions, and then we'll have some time for our Q&A session. So, Enthantha, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Olga. Yes, my name is Enthantha. I'm a research fellow at City St. George's University of London. What I'm going to talk about for this first part is what works well when recruiting for self-completion surveys. So this is based on the literature review we conducted as part of the project. The outline for what I'm going to talk about is as follows. So I'll first look at the literature search we conducted to carry out this part of the project. And then I'll look at some of the survey features that we looked at, including invites and reminders and response modes, and consider some of the recruitment materials that need to be considered. and look at incentives. For the literature review, we conducted a systematic search, this was between January and June 2024, to identify literature on self-completion surveys. We were interested in surveys that only use address-based sampling frames. As in the UK, that's the main sampling frame that is used. Specifically, we were looking at recruitment practices as well as survey quality indicators, such as response rates, representativeness, as well as survey costs. We looked at different databases for literature, which are listed there. We did find some wide-ranging literature in our search, and also a Cochrane review that was very helpful, systematic reviews, meta-analysis, but also we did find experimental studies and reports, as well as grey literature. Now, when considering invites and reminders, firstly, thinking about pre-notifications. Now, while pre-notifications may increase the likelihood of responding to a survey compared to no pre-notification, they may not always be cost-effective. They might always be a cost-effective strategy in some circumstances. This is partly because, in some ways, it may be sent as in place of a reminder. Whereas actually preference for some surveys would be to have an additional reminder, and then when participants actually have the questionnaire in hand. So it might not be a cost-effective strategy to use in some instances, although it does increase response rates compared to not providing one at all. From the literature, we found evidence that suggested it does continue to be effective in mail and web surveys. However, if you look at the outputs, this is from a Cochrane review, you can see that for the mail surveys, which is on the left, the effect was significant in terms of it resulting in high response rates, while for at the 5% significance level, I should say, while for web, this would only have been significant at 10% significance level. However, in terms of the impact of pre-notifications, they were particularly strong amongst older people, so those were 50 years and over in mail surveys. The ONS also investigated the impact of different letter combinations in their online survey that tested three experimental conditions. So these conditions included pre-notification. So the first condition included a pre-notification letter, an invitation letter, and a reminder. And the second condition included just an invitation letter and a first reminder. And then a third condition included an invitation letter, as a first reminder and the second reminder. You can see really the main difference here of what we're interested in actually. So it's the first and third conditions. So the first condition includes a pre-notification, whereas the third one uses a second reminder in place of a pre-notification. However, the results were not significant. So there was no differences in terms of response rates when a pre-notification was used instead of a second reminder. That's just one study though. Moving on to invites, invitations, and questionnaire access. Mode of contact is influenced by the information that is available from the sampling frame. As I've said, in the UK, the main sampling frame is the address-based sampling frame, and mail is the mode of contact really that is used. In some circumstances, of course, where we have additional information, such as longitudinal surveys or some other special surveys for special groups, there may be other additional information that's available. In mailed push web invitations, offering multiple methods of accessing the questionnaire improve response rates. So when you included a QR code as part of the in the invitation letter, in addition to a URL, this modestly improved response rates as opposed to just using URL only. QR codes also led to increased completion of questionnaires online and via mobile devices. Where additional information was available, for instance, where we've got telephone numbers, and as in this study, which was based on it's a longitudinal survey, what they found was if you included a survey link on a chat message, this led to people to complete their surveys via smartphone rather than a tablet or PC. So being able to complete that on a phone is better access, it's quicker and easier than having to have a computer to do that. Considering reminders, follow-up reminders are one of the most effective determinants of high response rates in self-completion surveys. Now, a strategy with at least 2 reminders was found to achieve the greatest benefit compared to one that had just 1 reminder. From this study, this was a meta-analysis. What they found was that there was no significant difference between offering 2 reminders or 3 reminders. So there was no difference between the 2. Other studies did find that more reminders did increase the response rates, but then the effects were very small. And also this comes at a cost. So the more reminders you issue, the more expensive your survey becomes. 2 or 3 reminders then appear to be the optimum number of reminders for high response rates. Within reminders, we also need to consider the interval between reminders. Now, evidence suggested that strategies that have shorter intervals between reminders resulted in higher odds, increased odds of response compared to ones that used longer intervals. So in this instance, shorter intervals were intervals considered to be between 1.5 weeks to 3 weeks, whereas longer ones were 3 to 6 weeks. In practice, we'll find that reminders are sent periodically, probably between 7 to 10 days as a first reminder. Now, next, we're going to consider some factors that affect mail and web survey response. As we've said, when it comes to self-completion surveys, the main modes for completing the surveys would be mail and web. And while they do have similar, some factors might be the same between the different modes, there are some factors that are quite specific between modes. For instance, if you consider visual design, when we're talking about mail surveys, we're going to be talking about paper, how the questionnaire is formatted, and the quality of the paper. That might influence people whether they complete it or not. When it comes to web, the important thing is how user-friendly the web questionnaire is to participants. And this requires your survey to be optimized for mobile devices, and this will encourage people to participate. They also need to be able to view the questionnaire and the responses on one page without having to scroll. So there's this different dynamics that need to be considered. Also, personalization might be another aspect, I should say, with handwritten, for mail surveys, handwritten and personalized letters significantly improve response rates. Whereas with web, some personalized emails where that information is available the contacts or the communications between the survey and the participants, they were more likely for your communications not to be considered as junk mail if they were personalized in some capacity. Having said that, this applies to sampling frames where we have additional information. Otherwise, with address-based sampling frames, that information is not available. But special surveys or longitudinal surveys, we may have that information. We also need to consider the ease of completion for both mail and web. For mail surveys, this requires participants to be able to navigate through the questionnaire, the paper questionnaire, and to complete that questionnaire. So if it's difficult to navigate, it might deter some participants. Whereas when it comes to web, it's a bit easier to click through your survey, whether it's on a tablet or desktop computer or a tablet. But for mobile phones, because they might have these small screens, they might be a bit more challenging for participants to use. So you need to be able to have a survey that is optimized to be completed through small devices. Of course, there's other issues like anonymity and privacy. When people are completing the survey over the web, there might be concerns about whether they're going to be tracked as they're connecting through online devices. And then, of course, there's demographics in terms of which populations are more likely to complete the survey using which mode. Older participants or people in rural areas or those that have less computer literacy, they might prefer mail surveys, whereas younger people, those that live in urban areas and are computer literate, they might prefer to use complete web surveys. We've mentioned being able to optimize the mobile devices, the questionnaire to mobile devices for the web surveys. Now, considering the different types of modes that can be used for self-completion, we're going to look at the single mode and also mixed mode designs. So among single mode designs, evidence suggested that web consistently yield lower response rates compared to other modes. So these modes, well, in this instance, we're interested in self-completion modes. So it would have been mail, for instance. Web increased response rates among sample members with the highest level of education, while this had no effect amongst those with the lowest level of education. But then in surveys, we know that the group that has a low propensity to respond will be the ones that have lower levels of education. On the other hand, mail mode enhanced survey response among those with lower levels of education, as well as older respondents. Now, considering mixed modes, they yielded higher response rates and were more representative samples than single mode designs. And this was likely due to respondents being able to have different modes of responding to the survey. Amongst mixed mode designs, we looked at evidence that compared sequential and concurrent designs. Experimental evidence on this comparison was inconclusive in terms of which design was the most effective. There were no significant differences between sequential web mail and concurrent web mail designs. As you can see here, the difference was not significant. Sequential, well, while the difference was not significant, sequential web mail design resulted in higher percentage of web responses compared to concurrent web or mail designs. The effect or impact for this was the cost per response was lower for sequential web design than for concurrent web or mail design. Moving on to recruitment materials and thinking about the survey sponsorship, mail questionnaires originating from universities were associated with higher odds of response compared to those that came from other sponsors like government departments or commercial organizations. This was not the case though for web questionnaires. The difference here was not significant. In terms of materials, postage, and looking at outgoing mailing, first-class mail yielded greater odds of response than second-class mailing. Now, a caveat with some of this is that some of these studies actually are using information from the United States, which vary slightly in terms of the services that are provided, the postal services that are provided compared to the UK. For instance, while response rates for first class and priority mailing, so this is a mailing service that is used in the States, which provides faster and provides which is faster and provides tracking services. While we found that the response rates were not significant between using first class and priority mailing, first class mailing was more cost effective in that it was cheaper in terms of cost than priority mailing. On the other hand, special delivery, so this would be mailing like recorded mailing, registered mailing, certified delivery, led to significantly higher response rates compared to standard delivery. However, this comes at a cost compared to standard delivery. When thinking about return mailing, stamped return envelopes were associated with greater odds of response compared to prepaid business envelopes or framed reply envelopes. On the other hand, multiple stamps on an envelope, on return envelope, increase the odds of response compared to using just a single stamp. Now, to be able to do this, though, it requires labor. So those are things to think about, whether is it worthwhile putting multiple stamps on an envelope manually, as opposed to using some already pre-stamped envelopes. Studies that looked at compared return mailing, looking at first class and second class mailing, find no significant difference between the two. Now, in terms of serving costs, if there's no significant differences in terms of effect, really it would be better than to use second class mailing for return envelopes as opposed to using first class mailing. Considering envelopes in self-completion surveys, the design and presentation of envelope or mailer are critical to influencing whether the letter gets opened in the first place. Now, studies that have looked at this, for instance, that investigated the color of the envelope, the size of the envelope, and also branding of the envelope, found no significant differences, really. So it appears that envelope color, size, or branding had no effect on response rates. Moving on to incentives. Firstly, kind of about the presence of incentives. It led to increased response rates when compared to no incentives at all. Yes, increase compared to no incentives. Now, the present incentives, sorry. So, okay, here, so the incentives here is regardless of whether they're monetary or non-monetary. So as long as if you offered participants, sample members, incentives, there was a higher odds of response compared to not offering them, regardless of what that incentive was. When it comes to timing of incentives, this is whether it's conditional or unconditional incentives. Unconditional incentives were more effective in improving survey response than conditional incentives. This was even if the monetary value of the unconditional incentive was lower. Now, there's some debates around this because for very large scale surveys, unconditional incentives might not be realistic. But in terms of effect, they are more effective compared to conditional incentives. Also, incentive provided with the initial invitation resulted in higher odds of response than those that were offered in subsequent mailing. Other studies have looked at strategies that combined unconditional and conditional incentives. And these were found to be more effective actually than either conditional or unconditional incentives alone. In terms of types of incentives, cash incentives were more effective in improving response compared to vouchers or gift cards. Now, in literature, cash and vouchers are considered as monetary incentive. So when these are compared to non-monetary incentives, the monetary incentives were more effective than non-monetary ones. Some studies have looked at a combination of unconditional incentives and conditional incentives. And this awareness study found that a strategy that offered a £5 gift voucher unconditional with a £10 conditional voucher was more effective than an unconditional gift voucher or a tote bag. So these were material incentives. One other aspect about the types of incentives. So for small value guaranteed gift cards, these resulted in higher odds of response than high payout price draws. Here, the effect really is the sample members being guaranteed an incentive as opposed to a price draw where they not likely, well, there's a chance that they might not actually win that prize draw. So in this instance, the small value guaranteed gift card was more effective than a high payout prize draw. However, having said that, a high payout prize draw would be, the studies indicated that actually they are more cost effective in terms of costs, not necessarily the response rates, but in terms of costs, because they will only offer a limited number of high price draws. Considering, so this is my last slide before I hand over to Christian. Considering the amount of incentives, there is no clear correlation between the value of incentives and response rates. Now, mindful here that correlation is a measure of linear association between some indicators. In this instance, the relationship is not linear. As you can see from this chart, that actually it gets to a point where there are diminishing returns for high value incentives. So although larger incentives tended to be more effective than smaller ones, yes, there is evidence that they do get diminishing returns at the end. Now, the optimal, in this study, the optimal amount of incentive that they found was between $5 US and $15 US. But the increase in response rates was at a declining rate. In the UK, typical amounts that are used are £5 to £10 in terms of value. Now, I'll hand over to Christian.
Thank you so much, Anthantha. Can I just, so before Christian's presentation, we have a couple of minutes for clarification questions. I don't see anything in the chat, but I know that Jamie, you wanted to ask something. Would you like to unmute yourself and ask the question, please?
Yeah, thanks. I did. On the personalization slide, I think you talked about it having an impact on response rates, and you mentioned handwritten letters or personalization. Can you just clarify by personalization, you mean the name of the individual on the letter?
So not necessarily, like I said, here when we're thinking about address-based sampling frames, that information might not be available. So personalization might be simple touches like handwritten letters in terms of address, or some notes, posted notes that are signposting, but those types of personalization, because additional information about that sample we might not have in general, but also in instances like, for instance, longitudinal studies where we might have that information, yes, some personalization might be more useful with additional information.
Okay, so I'm assuming if it's a longitudinal study, if you have the name, you should definitely use it.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
There is another question. William, would you like to unmute yourself and ask it, or would you like me to read it out?
I can ask it, although I have my daughter right here, so it might be distracting. My question is about the role of incentives. Do we also know anything about probabilistic incentives like lotteries and whether they are more or less effective than other types of incentives?
Well, lotteries actually, I think it was a part of the list of the other types of incentives that were included. Actually, lotteries are not effective. They can be classified as high price draws because they are not guaranteed incentives. So they are not as effective. So you would rather have a small guaranteed gift card than a lottery draw.
Yeah, makes sense to me.
Thank you. Any other questions, clarification questions at this point? We'll have more time after Christian's presentation. Okay, I don't see anything in the chat box. I don't see any hands. So, Christian, over to you. We cannot hear you.
I know, I'm sorry, I was struggling a bit with Zoom as well, so sorry about that. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Cristian Domarchi. I'm a research fellow at the University of Southampton, and I will be presenting the second part of our review of evidence about self-completion surveys, which is part of this research strand of Survey Futures. So probably what we should mention first is that this evidence review has been published on the Survey Futures website already. So if you're interested, you can look at the whole. It's a rather long document. It's rather lengthy, but you will have all the information we have been discussing in this workshop available to download. So one of the main components of this research strand, as always was saying at the beginning, was studying recruitment practices, aiming to identify methods for optimizing design characteristics and achieving more representative samples. And as part of this, we conducted the literature review that Enflantla was describing in the previous presentation, but also we carried out a review of technical reports of self-completion surveys conducted in the UK between 2018 and 2024. So that was around the time frame that we used for this. So in February 2024, we approached survey agencies, government organizations, and other organizations in charge of data collection and social research in the UK to request information about high-quality, large-scale probability-based surveys in the UK. The request covered mainly all mixed mode surveys with online and paper modes only, but also mixed mode surveys with interviewer administered modes, provided that a large proportion of responses were collected in self-administered modes. All online surveys, online only surveys, and cross-sectional longitudinal surveys, which for mixed mode surveys, we will be focusing on the self-completion stages only. As I was saying, the data must have been collected in the 2018 to 2024 period. And although we focused mostly on general population surveys, some surveys covering different age ranges or smaller geographical areas rather than the whole of the UK were included if they complied with the main criteria. So there was a lot of emails coming and going for this request, but after we received a lot of information, and after discarding things like repeated cases and all and similar things, we received information about 88 different surveys. So there's the breakdown of the organizations that kindly provided us with the information for this. So there was a lot of surveys by the ONS, as you would expect, NATS and Varian and Ipsos, the main survey organizations in the UK, but also from some local governments like the Scottish, Welsh government, and NISRA, the organization that collects data in Northern Ireland as well. So there was 88 surveys. which we received, but in the end, we ended up discarding many of them, mostly because we were not as interested in the mainly face-to-face or telephone-administered surveys, or surveys that, for example, during COVID were briefly conducted by a self-administration, but only during that period, and then they quickly came back to face-to-face administration after the COVID restrictions were lifted. And also some surveys that were outside this 2018-2024 timeframe. So probably some surveys whose technical reports were published later than that also have to be excluded from the report. But in the end, we finished up with a list of 49 surveys, 106 instances. So some surveys were mostly the longitudinal and repeat cross-sectional ones. We had several instances of each of these surveys. So that's the list that was included in the review. We were interested in things like the general characteristics of each survey. So description, name, obviously agency, data collection organization, time, place, sampling design, method, type of report, contact and response modes, communication strategies, all the available survey materials, including initial letters, reminders, postcards, leaflets, notch-to-notch cards. These were all reviewed in detail, and we built a spreadsheet for that one as well. So we had a spreadsheet for all the surveys, but we also had a different spreadsheet analyzing each of these materials. Incentives, type, timing, mode of delivery, the amount provided in each case, and the outcomes. So we were interested, of course, in response rates, but also achieved sample sizes, whether there was an indication of sample composition, representativeness, that kind of thing. So we also collected that information. And the outcome of this exercise was, as I was saying, a spreadsheet, and that spreadsheet forms the basis of the analysis that we conduct as part of the evidence review that's published already on the Survey Futures website. So, as I was saying, it is a lengthy document, so I will be just showing you some brief descriptive stats and some things that might be interesting for the analysis before we turn to the survey practice guide in the next presentation. So basically, we can see that most of the surveys we analyze in the data set were collected during COVID or immediately after it. So we have a couple of surveys with data collection during 2024, but it's mostly between 2020 and 2022, more or less, 2023, when they were collected. We have a lot of different topics. So several surveys have to do with COVID, so they were COVID specialized. But we have surveys that were more general, so we call them here social attitudes and behavior, but it means general surveys, not specific to one topic. Most of them were annual, but we have a lot that were collected with a higher frequency, so quarterly, monthly, fortnightly, etc. So this table has a lot of information. But we found that most of the surveys were aimed at individuals, at adults, so individuals aged 18 or over or 16 or over. That was the vast majority of the surveys. As Enclantla was saying, most of them use an address-based sampling frame, so either the postal address file or other address files that might be appropriate here. But we also found some surveys that collect information about previous participants, some that use named sampling frames. I will be talking about some examples related to that. Most of the surveys were repeat cross-sectionals. We had a couple of longitudinals, of course, the ones that you would imagine that would be here. In terms of sampling method, as these are mostly online or mixed mode surveys, including an online mode, we have things like stratified and clustered sampling methods, designs used in the majority of cases. But we also have some surveys that are able to use things like simple random sampling or systematic sampling. For within household selection, which is a critical topic in online or self-administered surveys in general, the most frequent cases are surveys that request to interview up to 2 adults in each household or all adults in the household. And when the method is reported as part of the technical reports, the most frequent cases is just any adult in the household or or all adults or everyone in the household. So things like the most recent birthday method or the next birthday method are used, but less frequently than the other methods that I've just described. And in terms of median and mean completion times, most surveys that we reviewed are on the longer side, so taking 20 minutes or more, although the information about this is relatively scarce in terms of the reports. There were a lot of interesting experiments reported, so I will be mentioning a few of them next in the presentation. And there was obviously some also targeted procedures implemented. There's, as Olga was saying, there's another sub-project as part of this research strand that explored these targeted procedures. So there's also an evidence review published in the survey on the Survey Futures website about that. If you're interested, I will not be covering this topic in the presentation. In terms of contact modes, as we know, we have most surveys carrying out postal-only contacts, although we did find evidence about things like nudge-to-nudge, and for surveys using name sampling frames with details about the participants, it's possible to contact them via email, telephone in some cases. And the most frequent case, the most frequent response mode is this combination of paper and web, of web and paper, basically. So the designs that offer both alternatives for respondents. Although we do have, as we can see, several instances of surveys that include interviewer-administered modes, either via telephone, face-to-face, or both of them as well. So for the review of materials, we know that the technical reports of 90 survey instances mentioned 349 documents, so in terms of letters, emails, and postcards, and we managed to obtain 217 of them, basically because some of the reports do not include the materials that we would have liked to review as part of this analysis. And these documents were associated with 52 of the instances, so we have information, we have the materials for 60% of the instances that we received. We reviewed invitation letters, reminders, also reminder emails, postcards, etc. There's a lot of things that can be said about this, but mainly in descriptive terms, we found that most of the surveys in the UK sent 2 reminders after the initial invitation, with some of them sending 3. Well, and there's only 8% of the surveys that we reviewed that do not send any reminder or do not state that they do. Out of the mixed mode surveys, we found 63% of them using a sequential strategy. So basically, this would mean offering alternative modes other than the initial webs. This would be a push to web strategy. Offering them as part of a reminder rather than with the initial invitation, with 37% offering all modes concurrently. And this is just an anecdote, but we also coded the materials in terms of the color that was used most frequently along with the black, and we found that green and blue seem to be the most preferred one by the agencies sending these materials to the households. For incentives, out of the 92% of instances that actually explain their incentivization strategy, we know that 17 instances do not provide any incentives. This is for different circumstances. We can talk about that later. But among the ones that do send incentives, most of them send a conditional incentive only. So they apply only a conditional incentive. And conditional only is less frequent, and there's also some cases of combination of unconditional and conditional, mostly on longitudinal surveys, kind of the Understanding Society survey. Sometimes I've used a combination of both for certain data collection processes, but the most frequent case is conditional incentives being provided for respondents. Most of the unconditional incentives in our review were monetary. And 10% was the most frequent, 10 pounds, sorry, 10 pounds was the most frequent amount. 5 pounds were given in 10% of the cases. And in the rest of the cases, we have differing amounts, which can vary according to experimental or response conditions, whether people belong to a new or an old sample in longitudinal studies. That can make things like differential incentives that can cause this type of variation. In the review, there's only one instance that trialed a tote bag as an unconditional incentive in one of their experimental groups. The rest of the sample received £5. It was reported to be effective, but most of the instances in our review were monetary incentives. And all of the conditional incentives were monetary, with £10 the most frequent amount. £5 was given in 28% of the cases. And then we had some surveys, mostly the most challenging, the most complicated surveys in terms of response time and completion time would offer higher values of incentives like 15 or 20 pounds. So in terms of response rates, so that we're not mixing different things, we just group them in all of the instances in 4 groups. So for household-based general population, cross-sectional surveys of, let's say, new participants that need to be recruited with a fresh new sample each time. So this would be for the cross-sectional and repeat cross-sectional ones. We have response rates that move in that range between 10 and slightly over 30%. We do find some cases of that. We have slightly higher response rates on average, but for individual-based cross-sectional surveys of new participants. So when the sampling frame is a list of named individuals rather than a list of addresses, response rates can be a bit higher. For individual-based cross-sectional surveys of previous participants, so this is recruiting participants that have already responded to another survey, so kind of like a piggybacking approach, we also can observe somewhat higher response rates. And of course, as you would expect, household-based longitudinal surveys, the response rates tend to be on the higher side as well. So this is kind of a plot summarizing the same information. In terms of proportions of response per mode, we find that in general, 62% of the individual observations that we could find in the data set were collected via web. However, if you only consider mixed mode surveys, so if you remove the unimode surveys, which there's a couple of very large web-only surveys that kind of explain a lot of collected observations. If you remove them from the analysis, you will see that paper is still a very important component of the total of observations, explaining about 60% of the mixed mode survey strategy, because there's a lot of, again, large surveys that are still offering this mode, and the uptake is not that low in those cases. As I was mentioning before, there have been experiments embedded into several of these surveys, particularly in 32 survey instances in the data set. They were implemented concurrently with the main survey data collection. A lot of them were about communication materials, so kind of testing letter size, layout of the letters, the aspect, the contents. We have found 14 experiments about that. Also about incentives, so not only the amount, but when to provide this incentive, so the type of incentive to be provided. Mixed mode strategies experiments were also interesting because several surveys were trying to see when to provide the alternatives, or what would be the best way in which people could be persuaded to respond in one specific mode. If the agency wanted to direct respondents to the web mode first, so what would be the best strategy to do that? So there's a couple of experiments on that. And some other fieldwork procedures. There were experiments about other topics as well. So there's a lot of information here, which was surprisingly difficult to find. I mean, it was present in the reports, but obviously there's no like single repository or data frame containing these experiments. So it was a nice surprise to find them, but they're not systematically stored anywhere. So you have to look for them if you're interested in this kind of methodological experiment. We also produced a qualitative and very subjective classification of the reports themselves in terms of the information that was provided, whether the materials, the letters and the reminders were provided as well, and in terms of how easy or difficult it was to find them. And there's a lot of variability, of course. I'm pleased to say that most of the surveys have good reports with most of the information that would be required for such an analysis like this to be conducted again. But there were some cases in which we struggled a bit to find the information that was required for this kind of exercise of collecting information about them. For example, just as a quick example, only 31% of the reports provide any assessment of sample representativeness or sample composition. Most of them compare sample composition with high-quality population targets, which is what you expect. But for many other surveys, this is not included, mainly probably because of the survey topic or the general scope of the survey. But this is something that we would have expected to find. Similarly, things like questionnaire completion times, for example, for web modes, we think it's a relevant indicator, but it's mostly unreported. Some surveys report an overall response rate, but we were not able to determine the proportion of responses per mode for those mixed mode surveys. The communication strategies were sometimes not reported with sufficient detail, so we kind of didn't know whether reminders were sent or when, but in most cases there were, but I'm just illustrating a couple of examples of possibly missing information. And obviously there's the other problem that when included, not all indicators were reported in the same way. So for example, there's I think the most illustrative example is that there's different methods to calculate response rates, and we know about that, but this has to be explained in sufficient detail in the reports. And also some of this information was not initially available on the reports sent by the agency so that you can download publicly. So we had to obtain them from follow-up communications with key contacts. So that's not ideal for this kind of exercise. So as a conclusion for this part, before we move into the survey practice guide that we produce as a result of this review and the literature review, the most frequent recruitment protocols for surveys without field interviews in the UK involve recruitment by post with up to 2 reminder letters, conditional monetary incentives, and a sequential approach to mixed mode surveys. So one mode offered from the onset with alternative modes offered with subsequent mailings. We think that there's a lot of some interesting work being carried out by agencies in terms of recruitment practices and experiment that maybe can go unnoticed if you're not specifically looking for them like we were during the last couple of years, as they are hidden in technical reports. So maybe there's something that we can do about that. And about the technical reports, I have to say that our research strand of Survey Futures is currently working on a position statement about the contents of technical reports and what we think they should have in order to be informative and to allow people to understand exactly what was done by each survey. So this should also be coming up soon. So yeah, that's my presentation. I don't know if there are any questions, or maybe we can. Sorry, Olga.
Thank you very much, Christian. Very interesting. I can see that there is one question in the chat box. Michelle, would you like to ask the question yourself, please?
Yeah. Do you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
I do.
Yes, I saw when you showed the response rate, I saw that in the individuals freshly recruited, there were some cases with a very high response rate, like 70, 80%. Can you tell us something about the characteristic of these surveys?
Yeah, as I was saying, we not only considered these general population surveys, but some surveys that were very large, but were aimed at some specific subgroups. So I think these were surveys related to health, particularly in Scotland. So the sampling frame in this case were people who had used the public health survey, so they had the contact details and that kind of thing. And apparently a couple of them managed to get really high response rates, but it wasn't a general population survey in terms of trying to cover the whole of the population. It was a more specific, more targeted group. So we included them because they're still self-administered surveys and they were probabilistic as well. But yeah, they cannot directly be compared with others that are targeted at the whole population. Yeah.
I see.
Okay, any other questions for this specific part of the presentation? If not, probably we can now move to the Q&A session. We have quite a lot of time for this.
One question, if that's right. Olga.
Yes, of course. Yeah, of course.
The documentation you collected, is that available to anyone, or will that be available to anyone, or is it just the report that will be available?
At the moment, I think it's just the report because, some of the information is publicly available. So that could be also, we could signpost to where that can be downloaded, but many of the materials of the reports were specifically shared with us for the analysis, but they are not publicly available, so I don't think we could make them available.
I think there is a list of all technical reports, Christian, in the evidence review.
Yeah.
So all the technical reports which were basis for this evidence review, they listed there, but some of them were supplemented with information which were obtained through personal communication.
Yeah, that's correct.
Any other questions or suggestions? Or we're currently working on survey practice guide, and it would be really, really helpful to hear from the audience. What do you think? How would you like the survey practice guide to look like, and what should be included there? Yes, there is a question. Hagai, please. If you unmute yourself and here.
Yes. Hi. Thank you. That was very interesting, and I appreciate the work that was put into that. I was wondering, there was something that impressed me was that one of the tables that you showed that the rate of people who are using the web, preferring web responses, has increased, but kind of stabilized, kind of plateaued in between 2022 and 2024. So that's just a note that I thought was really interesting in your presentation. But another thing that I was thinking about is that a lot of people, especially in more kind of academic research, use panels, so online panels. Have you looked into those as well, or it's just like general response, open kind of sampling? Because are the same effects visible in the use of panels like Prolific or Qualtrics or whatever companies that run them?
So thank you for the question. I have to say that we didn't specifically look at online panels. That's part of this review. We were wanting to focus on probability-based surveys. Maybe Olga wants to say more about that. I see that you're nodding.
Yeah, so the whole focus was on high-quality surveys in the UK. So obviously there are online probability-based online panels, and I believe they were included into the review. Yeah, so NatSun online panel, for example, or Kronos. But we didn't cover the panels which are access panels. So because that wasn't, we were talking on, the whole focus of the Survey Futures collaboration is on high quality surveys.
Yeah. Thanks.
I can see something in the chat. Let me quickly have a look. Larissa?
Hi there. Yeah, no, I was just a selfish question, really. I'm particularly interested in young people. So both those surveys that are targeting young people on their own or young people and parents. But yeah, if there was anything, I haven't read the guide yet, but I will have a look, obviously. But if there's anything that sort of specifically distills those results for young people, then I would be fascinated to hear.
So thank you for the question again. So from the perspective of the review of agency surveys, I can say that we didn't focus particularly on specific groups. So that was definitely not part of this review that we were conducting. There was another sub-project of the research strand that was about targeted procedures. So maybe I don't want to say that there is information about that in that survey practice guide, but we mainly focused on general population surveys, and we didn't look at specific groups as part of this effort in terms of reporting recruitment practices for UK surveys. So yeah. Anything else to add, Olga? Maybe no.
Yeah, no, for the specific research strand, you're absolutely right. We were focusing on the general population rather than any specific population subgroups. But obviously, it's a very important topic, and there are colleagues who are working various projects, but they are not necessarily focusing on recruitment. So I don't know if we have a respondent-driven sampling project here, and we were trying to recruit young people using RDS, but I don't think, obviously your question is about incentives, about various materials, but we didn't focus on that. I'm wondering maybe some of the colleagues from Survey Futures would like to add something to this. Who is on the call today?
I could add one very brief thing, if you like, Olga, which is Christian mentioned the targeted procedures evidence review, which is already published, and a good practice guide is coming out very soon. There are some examples in that evidence review of surveys that have targeted materials to different age groups, and often young people do respond to different communication messages than other people. So trying to target the messages that you put in your invitation letter and so on to younger people is something that has been tried and does have some positive effects.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Peter. Michelle?
Thank you again. I have a question for the first presentation. When you were talking about the timing of the reminders or sending the letters, you said that research showed that the shorter timing was better, and you said it's between 1.5 and 3 weeks were the shorter, but then your conclusion was best thing is to send every 7 days. How do you come to this conclusion? It was not in the evidence you showed.
Well, with the 1.5 weeks to 3 weeks, the idea that was studied based on an average of some studies that so it was a Cochrane review that averaged out some time frames between the reminders, but then you also get some standard errors that come with it. So in practice, though, what we have seen that works was that for the initial reminder is after 7 days, and then subsequent reminders, so the second and third, is after 14 days. So that's the practice. So in terms of the literature and the practice, they sort of agree, but you do also get to have some error in terms of summarizing some of the statistics.
And these research are mainly in the UK and US, or do you find any differences between countries for timing?
It's difficult to say which countries it is because some of the meta-analysis, they summarize studies from all over as long as if they meet a certain criteria to be included in that study. So they might not be limited only to the US or the UK. In the UK, though, the standard practice that's applied would be the first reminder after 7 days, and then the second and third reminders at 14-day intervals.
Okay, thank you.
Apologies, something happened to my connection. Any other questions or suggestions or ideas for the survey practice guide?
Olga, I'm actually going to present some of the initial thoughts about the guide. Perhaps people can ask questions after that or contribute after that.
Yeah, that's a very good idea. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. I am going to share my slide. So bear in mind, so this is work in progress. Okay, so this is from the UK practice, but also from the literature. The attempt here is to try and put together some practices that should be included in a good practice guide in terms of, for stakeholders, for survey practitioners, in terms of what might be helpful in producing high response rates or good participation from respondents. So this is work in progress. So any suggestions would be helpful, and it's only part of the initial practices that we are thinking about. So this is separate into certain different sections. So thinking about in terms of mode of administration, I think since the COVID, the shift has been towards using more mixed modes method, so mixed mode designs as opposed to single mode. But there's still room for single mode designs to be used. Now, when it comes to self-completion surveys, the primary modes that are used of administration is mail or web, and recruitment practices really within this sphere should aim to maximize the response and representation within each mode. Now, some of the factors apply across both modes, but some are more specific to modes. For instance, if you think about mail surveys, with these, you need to consider the quality of the paper that you're going to be using, the printing that's going to be used, also the formatting of your of the questionnaire, how people are able to navigate within that. Is it easy to complete? Does it flow in a way that is logical for people to follow through? And this needs to really minimize the effort for the respondent to be able to complete the questionnaire. Now, in terms of groups, the different types of modes are going to draw different types of participants to those particular groups. So for male, for instance, this will tend to attract people who are older and also people who are not who are less digitally literate in terms of the sample members. When thinking about the web surveys, for these, a responsive visual design increases the likelihood that people are going to engage with the survey, and this needs to optimize the questionnaire to mobile devices because most of us these days are on mobile devices. So if you send a questionnaire that can be easily completed in a mobile device that's adapted to that, people are more likely to engage with it. But you also want an interface that is accessible, simple to complete using clicks or taps, whether it's your mobile screen where you can just tap your response, whether you can scroll through, you can read the response, the questionnaire, and the response all on one screen without having to scroll. Would encourage people to participate, and this also has draws some attraction for younger people in more urban areas, and also people who are more digitally literate. Now, in terms of mixed mode designs, the recruitment for mixed mode designs should be designed to maximize response while minimizing the mode-related the biases and costs with this. So a clear strategy about what type of modes you're going to consider within your mixed mode design, as we're focusing on self-completion surveys here. Whether it's sequential or concurrent in terms of mail and web modes. We need to minimize the mode effects by ensuring that questionnaires are similar as possible across different modes. And where there's some adaptations, this is considered carefully where necessary. We also need to consider monitor how mode-specific response patterns are apparent in terms of the data collection process. As we've highlighted already, one of the questions was that you do get this sort of a shift from towards web completion with some of these mode designs. For instance, with the preference for people using web, and it's apparent when people are offered sequential designs that they will complete the surveys, a high proportion tend to complete the survey via web as opposed to paper. However, this does sort of exclude some people who may prefer to complete by paper in the first instance and may not be able to complete by web in the first place. A sequential design might then make them not participate in some ways. And hence there's room for concurrent designs as well. In terms of communication approaches, what we did find in the literature was that the tailored design approach that is based on the social exchange theory was the mostly used approach in survey practice. This emphasized the importance of maximizing trust and also maximizing the perceived benefits that participants will get from engaging with the survey. At the same time, you also want to minimize the burden for them responding to the survey. There are other approaches that are out there in the literature, but there's limited evidence about their effectiveness. In terms of questionnaire access, what is clear is that when sample members are provided multiple modes of accessing the questionnaire, it's easier for them to participate in terms of which mode or which means or method they want to use. The QR codes, they don't add much in terms of cost for the communications in terms of letters, but actually they encourage people to complete the questionnaires through mobile devices, which is a more convenient way of participating in surveys. Where additional information is available, for instance, like mobile phone numbers or email addresses, text messages and email invitations as well, containing the link for the survey have been found to be useful. And of course, like I said, in terms of different groups participating in different ways, there's some people who may prefer paper. So as part of a practice, it would be good to offer a paper questionnaire, be it as with the invitation in the first instance, in a concurrent design, or as part of a follow-up reminder in terms of a sequential design. Typically, this is offered with the second reminder. In terms of the number and frequency of reminders, I think there's been a question on this already. In terms of number of reminders, up to 3 reminders has been found to be the more efficient, more optimal approach. It's between 2 and 3, so it's up to 3 reminders here should be sent. For the durational intervals between reminders, a first reminder sent 7 days after initial invitation, and a second reminder or third reminders sent at 14-day intervals thereafter. Now, one of the issues that comes up with this would be how, because we're dealing with mainly with postal communications here, would be how efficient the postal service is at delivering these letters. So if you're living in rural areas, there might be delays in when you receive your reminder after being sent the invitation letter. So there is all those dynamics that play in. And also reminders should only be sent to sampled addresses that have not responded at the time of the reminder. You do not want to inundate sample members with communications that is unnecessary. When they've already completed, you would rather not send them additional communications or reminder letters. That will save costs, but also it will avoid inundating participants with contacts. Now, primarily with address-based sampling frames, the type of contacts, type of reminders that are used are via post. But where additional information is available, as in longitudinal studies or some special special surveys that look at specific groups where you might have additional information like telephone numbers, SMS reminders do outperform emails or mail in terms of posting response rates. And this can be personalized as well, where it's addressed to someone specific. They are more likely to treat it as a message for them as opposed to the junk or spam contact or spam text message. The other aspects to consider will be the branding and appearance of recruitment materials. Materials really should be branded with logos from trusted institutions or sponsors. Now, evidence does suggest that materials branded with university logos achieve higher response rates as opposed to those that come from other organizations. For postage and mailing days, outgoing mail should be sent via first class as opposed to second class. Thus more effective, plus it may be delivered in a more timely manner. In terms of return mailing, there was no evidence really of a difference between second class mailing and first class mailing. Now, to save cost, second class mailing can be used for returning mailing rather than first class mailing. In terms of scheduling the mailing itself, we did find some evidence that scheduling mailing to arrive towards the end of the week rather than the beginning of the week was more effective, as participants were more likely to then access and begin the questionnaire when the materials arrive later in the week. This, I suppose, assumes the working week for people, that if they receive their communications or material at the start of the working week, they might not have time to do it. Whereas if they receive it towards the end of the week, they are more likely to engage with the survey. In terms of recommendations for incentives, now I think it's clear from the literature that incentives should be offered. It doesn't matter what type it is in the first instance, but incentives should be offered. There are some other designs then that are used in practice, for instance, where responsive designs actually incorporate incentives for groups with low propensity to respond to surveys. So this might be people who are living in deprived areas. So with responsive designs, in the process of collecting, once the fieldwork has started and you realize that actually there's some areas where the responses are lagging behind, some responsive designs can help boost up response for those particular areas. So incentives is one of those features. You also have differential incentives for groups with low propensity to respond, but this really would be a design from the beginning of the survey, with it being targeted for specific groups where you would want to offer them high incentives compared to people with higher response, higher propensity to respond. There's also some other measures like early bird incentives, where sample members are offered a high incentive for completion if they complete before a certain period, compared to those that complete after a certain period in the fieldwork process. With time of incentives, this is evidence is clear here as well that unconditional incentives are more effective than conditional ones. However, people try to manage costs within when collecting data, conducting their surveys. So unconditional surveys may not be, incentives may not be practical, for instance, in large-scale surveys due to costs. However, where possible, unconditional incentives really should be used. Also, strategies that combine both unconditional incentives and conditional ones have been found to be effective in encouraging response. So here, a strategy might be to use a small unconditional incentive at the beginning of the survey, and then follow this up with a larger conditional incentive after they've completed the participated in the survey. In terms of type, in the UK, there is cash incentives are not used that much. However, evidence does suggest that in terms of incentives, you would want to offer incentive that minimizes the effort for respondents to redeem. So cash is the most liquid incentive that can be offered. And it is more effective. Like I said, in the UK, it's rarely used. However, monetary incentives like vouchers are also more effective compared to non-monetary incentives, even if they are of lower value. The larger the incentive, the more effective the incentive, but also this has diminishing returns and might also not be feasible to complete to use in a survey, especially if you have also it's a very large survey. And in the UK, the practice really is to use incentives of £5 to £10. I think this is where we are really in terms of what the recommendations might be for a practice guide.
Thank you very much, Infanta. Really interesting, really useful. We have quite a few questions. So first, it was a comment from Isabella. Isabella, would you like to unmute yourself? Because then I think later you had a question as well. So maybe if you ask both at the same time. Are you still here, Isabella?
Yes, I am here, but I have some difficulties, of course. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for the presentation. It was very interesting. I have a question about what do you recommend for designing questionnaire for different device, because when we read on computer, we read horizontally, so the question can be presented in a certain way, and when you go on your telephone, you will have more a vertical approach of the question. So is it that this, I will combine my questions, is it that these differences will end up with surveys that will have shorter questions and shorter even response grids? Do you have an idea about that? What the impact of the different use on different device will have on the questionnaires? I don't know if I am clear.
Yes, I can understand. I think it's a difficult one. I think certainly one thing that we need to do is to be able to have a questionnaire. It needs to be designed in a way that it can be read. For instance, if you think about the smallest device that you can use for a questionnaire, I think that needs to be the standard for what you design, how you design your questionnaire. For instance, if we're going to be using for a web survey and you want people to be able to access that on a mobile phone, that needs to be the minimum standard for accessibility for your questionnaire. And then it can be optimized specifically for that. If it can work on a small device, it will work on a bigger device. So the aim really is to try and make your survey or your question and responses I think here the point to stress is that you don't want people scrolling up and down, so it needs to fit on a page. So your question and responses need to fit on a screen.
So you are saying that it will change the questionnaire in a way, because you will have to reduce the amount of information you give to the respondent to answer the question. I am sure it will change the questionnaires.
It would, but then the question between devices will be the same.
Yeah.
So how it's presented between devices, I think the key is for the question to be presented in a similar way across different devices.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, next question from Daniel. I think Daniel doesn't have access to the microphone, so I'll read the question. I'm aware of a number of non-probability studies who report comparisons between recruitment channels, social media, mailed invitations, word of mouth, etc. For instance, the EU's fundamental rights agencies provides metrics of how respondents reported hearing about their surveys, which helps to understand which recruitment channels are resonated with which subgroups. Did you find similar technical documentation in any of the studies involved in your study? I think it's probably a question to Christian.
Yeah, thank you for the question. I think the surveys we reviewed in general had one main method of recruitment each. So it was probability-based survey in which people would receive the communication or not receive the communication, but you didn't have like different channels of recruitment. And it was the same case for the individual-based surveys in which, again, there was a sampling frame and people were invited to participate, maybe with a bit more personalization in terms of the invitations and the reminders, but it was still just one main channel of recruitment. So I don't think we have that kind of example of different modes of recruitment in our review. It would be interesting to see for other types of recruitment methods, but in the case of our review, we don't have that kind of analysis.
Thank you, Christian. Janet, would you like to unmute yourself and ask the question?
Yes, hello. So I just wanted to share something with you in case it was of any interest. So I actually work at the University of Essex and I'm one of the participation communication officers. So I deal with hundreds of the participants. One thing that we've been experiencing is that when participants receive the letters alone and it doesn't have a QR code, they've been having great difficulty in understanding and correctly putting the survey link into the URL code. So I think earlier on you said that response rates have gone up when the mailings have a QR code. And I suspect that is absolutely true, because I think what we discovered is when you say to someone, this is where you got to put the address, a lot of people, especially the older generations, don't know the difference between a URL bar and a search engine. So when they're putting the address or whatever it is, the link into the search engine, they're not being directed to the right place. So what's happened is when we have then sent an email, so the link has then been sent in another format, they've been able to access it. So we found that there was potentially a lot of non-respondents because of that problem. So I didn't know if that would be of interest, but we've certainly found that in the last year.
That's very interesting, yeah.
We thought it was very interesting. We couldn't understand why we were getting so many calls. It's because we had to take the link off the website because we were working on two platforms. And then all of a sudden we were like, why can people not put this link in? And we realized it was because they didn't really understand, and neither did we at the time, actually, that there is a big difference between the two areas to put information in. So that was just really interesting. So I thought I'd share that with you.
I can just say that when reviewing the materials, the more recent ones tended to include QR codes, so it was more of a more recent thing, and I can assume it was partly at least because of that, because people having difficulties typing in links and being directed to the survey. So yeah.
Yes, so the transferring of the link from paper format to a web format, there's an opportunity for error, which is why I think if it's a text message that has the link.
Sorry, I'm just on another phone call. Can you call me back in 2 minutes? I'm so sorry about that. I had my phone going at the same time. Massive apologies. Sorry, were you asking me a question?
No, it was just to confirm really in terms of the process with which the transferring of a link from paper to another device creates a problem.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
I also just wanted to add, there's a couple of very recent studies that have shown quite clearly that these days, including QR code, makes a substantial difference to response rates. But these are very recent and are since the end of the review that Christian and Sansa have carried out, so they weren't included in those studies.
Thank you very much, Peter. Next question from Jamie. Jamie, can you unmute yourself?
Yeah, okay, thank you. Yeah, I just wondered if there was any evidence from the review of the survey research companies, government departments, whether they're trying to maximize representation rather than response rates in their designs. And so they're looking at whether a sequential design is more representative than a concurrent, because, you know, we might overrepresent too many older people in a concurrent. And then within a sequential, maybe you randomly select which addresses you're going to send a paper questionnaire to minimize overrepresentation, for example. Is there any evidence from the research you've done that would suggest that?
Not that I'm aware of. I think this is one of, it's a fairly new aspect, and there's pros and cons for both, in that the sequential will push people towards web. Evidence does suggest that we have a higher proportion of people completing via web. Now, whether in that process, people who are never or are not able to complete via web, they get discouraged in the first instance that they can't do it. They might not even read the letter to see that a paper questionnaire is going to be provided with another reminder. Whether they get to that stage of not even bothering to participate, we've not come across any specific studies that have looked at that effect. But certainly it's the dynamic that needs to be considered. And with the concurrent one, it's fair enough in that it offers people their choice from the beginning. So those that are not comfortable via web, they might complete it first time when they receive it with a concurrent option. But also, evidence that we've seen is that there is no difference in terms of response rate. I don't think it completes sample composition, but that's something that probably needs to be looked at in terms of how does it affect the sample composition between the two. But certainly it's an area for further research in that sense.
Jamie, you had two more questions about reminders and SMSs. Would you like to ask them right now? Or?
If that's okay, yeah. Just quickly on the reminder strategy, well, this comes again back to representation over response rates, because, you know, once you've sent, let's say you send a paper questionnaire in the first reminder, is there any value sending a second reminder, which is just an email reminder? A paper reminder, a postal reminder, but without any paper questionnaires, to increase not response rates but representation. So what I'm trying to understand is, have you looked at representation as well, or just response rates in terms of the contact strategy? So do you see an improvement in representation the more reminders you send, and especially if you send reminders after you sent a paper questionnaire?
I think that's still probably something else for further research. But once respondents have been given the paper questionnaire, I do not think there is, in terms of, let's think about cost as well within this, I don't think there would be a point of sending multiple paper questionnaires to an address if they have not responded.
No, sorry, just postal invites after a paper questionnaire where they can respond online. So, you know, additional.
Yes, so I guess that actually gives them the choice. So if they have the paper questionnaire, and that is if they have not discarded it between the reminders, but they will have the access to the paper questionnaire, but also they will still have access to the web link should they choose to. So it gives them choice in that instance, I would imagine. But yes, I think further research in terms of what the impact on sample composition with these would be something that's useful.
And about SMSs, would you like to ask this as well?
Yeah, is the standard, what's your recommendation? Do you send links in SMS, or would you avoid sending links in SMS? Does it?
If you have the information, it's just like the previous comment about the links being easier to use via SMS or email, as opposed to transfer from paper to an online device, to an electronic device. So I think the key thing is to make it easier for people to participate or to access the questionnaire.
So links in SMS aren't seen as a greater risk, of like, oh, we're gonna hit a link and it's gonna take us to some dodgy website.
I think when they are sent, they should have codes to access. Or I think they should have a code to access. Just like if I'm to access it on a phone, I'll still need to put on a web. I still need to have an access code to access the questionnaire. So
no,
I think
yeah,
security does.
If I saw a link on an SMS, I probably wouldn't click on it because I'd be concerned that I'm being sent a link in an SMS. Whereas if I was sent a link in an email, I'd be less concerned. I just wondered if there was any evidence there.
The thing though with SMSs is that it's information that is additional to a sampling frame. So imagine that is actually might be a longitudinal study where people have participated before, so they might actually be expecting, or they might know that, as opposed to first contacts, for instance. Yeah, if it's a first contact, I understand that, but then with the sampling frame that we use, we might not have the telephone number to be able to send SMS to them.
Okay.
Thank you. Then there is a question from Helena. Do you have a recommendation regarding pre-notification letters? And Hunter, well, maybe you could.
Yes, with pre-notification letters, I think there's certain circumstances where they might be useful, but the challenge with them is that they might not be a cost-effective strategy, in that they might be used in place of a reminder. Whereas a reminder is probably more effective in that people are getting contact when they can actually access the questionnaire. With a pre-notification, they might not have access to the questionnaire, and it's just a letter that's sharing information. So it might not be a cost-effective strategy in that sense. But for surveys, for instance, where, recommendation would be, if you are to use a pre-notification letter, it shouldn't be used in place of a reminder. You'd rather use it on its own right, as opposed to it replacing a reminder. If that makes sense.
Thank you very much, Antantha. Next question from Gabriel, who doesn't have access to the microphone. There are two questions here. What do you recommend for surveys that are trying to minimize participation burden by using complex routing for online surveys?
Yeah, I don't think that is something that we necessarily covered with the review.
No, I don't think so. So probably we should move to the next question, which is, what would you advise, or have you seen examples of surveys that use mixed modes or some form of knock to nudge to reduce response bias?
Yeah, I mean, we, as part of another of the sub-projects of these groups, we are precisely analyzing several surveys that have used knock to nudge, primarily as a way of improving response rates, but we also have seen that it has positive effects in terms of improving sample composition and possibly improving the participation of some groups that may have been underrepresented without this instance of knock to nudge. So yeah, we are studying that as part of another of the sub-projects of these research strands.
Okay, thank you, Christian. There are two more questions. Helena, I don't know, can you maybe unmute yourself and ask this question about QR code?
Hopefully. Sorry, I've lost my own question in the chat now. So it's
you found it, okay.
long, but so when you push people online via a QR code, you're generally pushing them via a phone to answer, but we've got quite a lot of worries about pushing more people to phone because it's quite a long survey that we're doing. Was there anything about like the balance between getting more people started versus the risk of having more drop off during the survey by pushing more people on to the phone?
Yes, I think with the QR code is to get people started because it's a link that is easy to get to the correct landing. You can, with most surveys, you can start the survey on a phone, but then complete it on a different device. So it's possible to do that. But yes, a phone for a long survey might be people might drop off in the process. So, but starting a QR code makes it easy for them to access this questionnaire in the first place, and then they can save and restart the survey in another device.
Well, thank you.
Thank you. I think we have time for last question. Willem, would you like about the security concerns about the use of QR codes? Would you like to ask this question?
Sure, although it's more of a comment because we also considered using QR codes at Statistics Netherlands, but I think I heard that most recently they don't want to do that, and they cited security concerns, but I'm not aware of any security concerns really. So I'm just wondering to what extent anybody else has heard about these concerns. And I do kind of understand the logic because if it's just a QR code and you scan that, you might not be paying attention to the URL code. And that is usually one of the cues you can use to figure out whether you're being scammed or not. So at least from our perspective as Statistics Netherlands, we are like maybe more worried about this, that potential scammers could like make it look like the letter is from Statistics Netherlands and then they can scam people.
Would anyone like to comment on this?
I can just say that that aspect about the safety of QR codes is not something that came up on at least on the evidence that I review yet. So yeah, I'm not sure if it appeared in one of the evidence papers that maybe Atlanta read because.
No, I have not. But I guess security is an important feature to think about. In any case, it would probably be something. As technology advances, I think these aspects will come up along the line. But yes, I've not come across any at this stage.
Yeah, I think it might be interesting for the handbook because I think for multiple things that we've seen discussed today, there's sometimes a discrepancy between what the research says and what people are actually doing.
Yeah.
And sometimes there may be a good reason for that, and sometimes there are bad reasons for that. And
that is true. That is true.
Yes.
Thank you for the suggestion.
Yep.
Thank you. I think before closing, Peter had 2 comments. Would you like to about SMS reminders and about use of mobile phones and optimization for mobile completion? Peter, would you like to?
I can. I think what I wrote was self-explanatory. I think on both SMS and QR codes have the tendency to push people to respond on their mobile phone rather than on a larger device like a tablet or a laptop. So they may well increase response and possibly even improve representativity. But the price you pay for that is that more people are responding on their phone. What I would say is that regardless, even if you only send postal letters, more people are responding on their phone year on year in surveys in the UK anyway, and it's now a very large proportion. So you can't avoid people responding on your phone, and you have to design your web surveys to work in that mode. I think that was my conclusion. What was the other comment, Olga?
About SMS reminders and understand the society.
Yes, I mean, the same thing about pushing people to their phone, but also we do include links in our SMS reminders because we basically think that if you send any kind of communication that somebody can't do anything with, and communication that isn't actionable, it's unlikely to have any effect. And an SMS without a link would be in that category pretty much. I mean, people could go and try and dig out the mailing they got a fortnight ago, but it's not a very clear link between the SMS and the mailing, so not very effective.
Thank you so much, Peter. I think we have 2 minutes over the time. I would like to say massive thank you to the presenters, really interesting presentations, and I'm very grateful to the audience for very interesting questions and comments, very interesting discussion. Thank you all very, very much, and we hope to see you in other workshops. So there is another one at 3 p.m. on accessibility and inclusivity, and probably we will see some of you there as well. Thank you all very, very much. Bye-bye.